So you're looking for the most transparent preamp to be using during your tracking sessions. Well, I might have just the thing for you. Today we're going to be doing a review of the Grace Design M501 500 series preamp. But before I give you my thoughts and my review, let's first do what we always do and roll that intro. For those who are unfamiliar with Grace Design, they are a company who are widely known to making some of the most transparent preamps on the market. In fact, it's even quoted on their website that their preamps don't add vibe, they simply just capture it, which I think is pretty well put. But what we want to know is, does the M501 actually compare well to the rest of the other products that Grace Design has to offer? I mean, is it truly as transparent as it claims to be, or should you maybe consider investing in another preamp? Well, that's what I'm going to go ahead and find out today. Now, to do this review properly, the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is look at all the parameters that come included with the M501. After that, we'll go ahead and observe the EQ behavior that we were able to capture using Room EQ Wizard. Lastly, we'll go ahead and listen to some audio examples that we were able to capture comparing the M501 to the preamp that comes included in my interface, which is the Focusrite 18i20. After that, we'll close out with our conclusion, and that way you guys can go ahead and make a decision of what you guys think. With that being said, let's go ahead and move to the next part of the video. Now, before we can actually talk about the M501, it's best to take a moment and talk about what is arguably Grace Design's most iconic preamp, the M101. You see, the M101 is kind of what started it all. When it came out, it sparked a lot of buzz because of how clean and transparent it sounded in its recordings. With this popularity, it's grown into other different formats and different products, such as an 8-channel version, and now most recently what we know today as the 500 series version, which is the M501. Taking a look at the front of the M501, we're actually presented with several different parameters. At the very top, we do have our gain knob, which is a step gain knob, by the way. It goes all the way from 10 to 65 dBs, which also has 5 dB of variation in between each step. Just below that, we have our phantom power. Below this, we have our ribbon mode button, more to discuss on that later. And just below this, we do have our high pass filter, which will filter everything below 75 Hertz. Just underneath this, we do have our trim knob, which does allow for an additional 10 dB of gain. Lastly, we do have our high Z in, which is going to be perfect for those situations such as DI guitars and also, say, keyboards as well. Now that we've had a chance to look at all the parameters associated with the M105, it's now time to go ahead and take a look at the EQ curves that we were able to capture inside of Room EQ Wizard. With the default settings, the M501 has a fairly flat EQ curve. It's only towards the bottom end of the spectrum between 50 Hertz and 20 Hertz. There is a slight roll off, but it's less than 1 dB, so hardly a noticeable difference. Next, with the high pass filter engaged, we do see that everything below 75 Hertz is removed as intended. However, between 76 Hertz and what looks to be 500 to 600 Hertz, we do have a pretty steep roll off. In fact, it's about a -3 dB roll off here. This shouldn't be problematic. However, should you notice that your audio source starts to sound thin or doesn't have much body to it, it might be best to go ahead and leave this button disengaged. With the ribbon mode engaged, we can actually see this is the flattest response out of all three of the graphs that we've looked at so far. Though it's only a slight variation from what we saw with the default settings, it is interesting to see that this is the flattest one. However, I am at least happy to see that there is consistency with these being extremely flat and transparent preamps, just as Grace Design has promised. Lastly, we compiled all of our graphs into one singular one. As you can see here that the high pass filter and the default settings are at the same level, but you'll notice here with the ribbon mode engaged that it's slightly higher. This is due to when the ribbon mode is engaged. It raises the mic input impedance, and it also deactivates the 48-volt phantom power as well, and this is just made in order to protect any ribbon mics from any damage. Now, before we move on to the next part of the video, I would simply ask if you would consider subscribing. It's the best way that you can go ahead and support the channel, and well, I have some more video ideas that will be coming out, including product reviews and some others I'm keeping a secret that, well, you'll just have to subscribe in order to find out what they are. And with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the next part of the video. Now that we reviewed all the features of the M501 and observed the EQ curves that we saw in Room EQ Wizard, it's now time to go ahead and take a listen to what it actually sounds like. Now, like I said, we are going to be doing a comparison between my Focusrite 18i20 preamp and also the M501 itself. But to make sure that this is a fair fight, what I've done is the following. I went ahead and connected my Slate ML1 to a mic splitter that then sends a copy of the same exact signal to the M501 and also the Focusrite 18i20. With the signal being exactly the same, it will allow us to go ahead and discern with more ease the differences between these two preamps. One additional item to note is that though we are using the Slate ML1 microphone, we are not using any emulations. Therefore, the sound that you hear is just the microphone by itself. In addition, we did also make sure to level match the different audio tracks so that way they were consistent and the same all throughout. With that being said, let's go ahead and take a listen to these audio tracks.
This is an audio recording comparing the differences between the Scarlett 18i20 preamp and the Grace Design M501 500 series preamp. We're listening back to this audio to hear the audible differences between these two preamps. This is an audio recording comparing the differences between the Scarlett 18i20 preamp and the Grace Design M501 500 series preamp. We're listening back to this audio to hear the audible differences between these two preamps.
So after listening to those two audio tracks, I have to say that tonally they do sound fairly similar. However, one thing that is the most noticeable between the recordings is how little noise the Grace Design M501 has. You can notice this in particular when you listen to the parts of the audio where I'm not speaking, and you can hear that little bit of hiss that's happening there. Again, this is very apparent in the 18920, but in the Grace Design M501, it's practically non-existent. I have to say, I can see how this would be desirable in situations such as doing other dialogue work or vocals on a song where you want to make sure you have the cleanest possible audio that you can get. Now, at the time of this recording, the M501 retails at $749 MSRP. Now, this goes into more of the higher tier, not only in quality, but also in terms of price. If you do want to try to find a cheaper option, one alternative could be the Cush Audio Omega. This is another 500 series preamp that I own that I feel does a very great job at making sure that you do get very clean recordings. Another option would be to go to places like reverb.com or even eBay, where you can find some of these used at a much more affordable price. I think I picked mine up for about $600, but just make sure if you go with this option that the unit is working properly. Test it when you receive it to make sure that it's working as intended. And that's been my review of the Grace Design M501. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I'm really interested to know what you guys thought of it as well. So please let me know down in the comments, what did you think between the two different audio examples? And if you had experience using this preamp before, or say any of the other preamps that Grace Design has to offer, I'd love to know your thoughts and what kind of application you were using it for. And with that being said, we're now here at the end of the video, so thank you so much for hanging around. I really appreciate it. If you're looking for more content like this, maybe check out some of these other videos that I have here available. But until then, happy mixing.